The letter in his hand shook my entire world, though his fingers held it steady, cold, and deliberate. I had given that company 5 years of my life. Late nights, missed birthdays, endless sacrifices. I thought my loyalty meant something. But when he slid the termination papers across the desk, his eyes weren't filled with regret. They were filled with triumph. "You're no longer needed here, Claire," he said smoothly, as if he were doing me a favor. I wanted to ask why, though. I already knew. She was standing just outside his office, pretending to shuffle papers, but her smirk betrayed her. The new assistant, his mistress, the woman who had somehow replaced every ounce of value I thought I had. That was the day I walked out of the building carrying nothing but a box of my things and a heart that burned with humiliation. He thought he had destroyed me. He thought I would fade away, forgotten. But he was wrong. Years passed, and the girl he fired was reborn. I rebuilt myself from ashes, sharpened every weakness into a weapon. Until one day, fate opened the door I had been waiting for. When I walked down the aisle, every camera flashing, every guest gasping at the elegance of my gown, I held the arm of the most powerful man in the room, the new CEO, my husband. And as I turned my head, my eyes locked with his, the man who had once thrown me aside for his mistress. The color drained from his face when he realized who I had become. I didn't need to speak. My smile said it all. Revenge had just taken center stage. His stare clung to me as though he could pull me back into the past, into that dim office where he held all the power and I was nothing but another name to be erased. But this was no office. This was a cathedral dressed in gold, a celebration that belonged to me now. I saw the tremor in his hand as he raised his glass too quickly, the wine nearly spilling over. That same arrogance he used to wear like a crown had cracked, and in its place was panic. I kept my smile soft, practiced. The kind of smile a CEO's wife was supposed to wear, but beneath the veil of silk and pearls, my pulse thundered. Every step I took down that aisle was an echo of the night he'd broken me, and every heartbeat reminded me of how far I had climbed to stand here. I had thought revenge would taste like fire, but in that moment it tasted like victory. Calm, cold, inevitable. When the vows ended and the reception began, I moved through the sea of handshakes and congratulations with poise. People leaned in to whisper compliments, to tell me how stunning I looked, how lucky the CEO was to have found me. But I didn't look at them. My eyes drifted across the room again and again until they found him. He couldn't stop staring. His mistress-turned assistant was beside him, her smile stiff, her laughter forced. She clung to his arm the way a drowning person clings to driftwood. She knew. She had to. Later, as champagne flowed and music swelled, I finally approached him. The crowd parted slightly, as though they sensed something electric about to unfold. He tried to stand taller, to straighten his suit jacket, but I caught the flicker of fear in his eyes. "Claire," he breathed, the sound of my name tasting strange on his lips. It had been years since he'd spoken it, and now it landed between us like an unfinished sentence. I tilted my head, feigning politeness. "It's Mrs. Bennet now." My husband's name, sharp and heavy, cut into him like a blade. His mistress shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between us, sensing danger but powerless to stop it. He forced a smile, that same insincere curve of the mouth he once used to dismiss me. "I didn't realize—" "Of course you didn't," I interrupted gently, my voice low enough that only he could hear. "You never realized anything. Not what I gave, not what I sacrificed, not what you threw away." His jaw clenched. "This isn't the place." "Oh, it's the perfect place," I whispered, leaning in, my perfume wrapping around him like smoke. "Because here, in this room filled with the people you've always tried to impress, you finally get to see what real power looks like. And it isn't you." His mistress stiffened, her nails digging into his arm, but he didn't move. He couldn't. He was locked in place, trapped in the web he had spun for himself years ago. I straightened, my smile returning as if nothing had passed between us. Then I turned away, gliding back into the crowd, leaving him to choke on the silence I'd left behind. but I could feel his eyes burning into me, searching for some trace of the woman he'd once crushed. She was gone. In her place stood someone unbreakable. The night stretched on. My husband gave his speech, his words sharp and commanding, the room hanging on every syllable. I stood by his side, my hand resting gracefully on his arm, the picture of loyalty and devotion. But inside, my mind was on the man across the room, the one shrinking with every toast, every photograph, every smile that reminded him of how high I had climbed without him. At one point, I caught sight of his mistress alone near the bar, her expression twisted with unease. I walked over, each click of my heels deliberate. She looked up, startled, as though she expected me to strike her. Instead, I leaned close, my voice calm and steady. "You can stop looking over your shoulder," I said softly. "I'm not here to destroy you. You did that to yourself the moment you believed you could take my place." Her lips parted as though she wanted to argue, but no words came. I left her in silence, the truth settling like a stone in her chest. As the night neared its end, I found myself back on the dance floor, my husband's hand firm on my waist as we moved to the rhythm of the band. Cameras flashed, guests applauded, and all the while, I held his gaze with a tenderness that hid the storm still raging inside me. Over his shoulder, I caught sight of the man who had fired me, who had laughed as I packed my things into a box, and walked out the door years ago. He was smaller now, diminished, a shadow of the king he once thought himself to be. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel the burn of betrayal. I only felt power, calm, steady, absolute. The girl he discarded was gone forever, and the woman who replaced her was someone he would never, ever be able to control again. As the music swirled around us, I let my husband guide me across the polished floor, but my focus wasn't on the dance. My gaze kept drifting back, again and again, to the man who had once held my fate in his careless hands. He lingered at the edge of the room, a spectator now, sipping nervously at his drink, the sparkle of confidence he once wore like armor replaced by something thinner, something brittle. He tried to mask it, of course. He laughed at jokes that weren't funny, leaned too close to people who barely tolerated him, clapped too loudly after speeches, but the mask slipped each time his eyes landed on me, radiant under the chandelier lights, adored by the very crowd that used to dismiss me as invisible. Every glance was a reminder that the tables had turned so violently he could hardly keep his balance. My husband leaned closer, his voice a low murmur against the music. "He hasn't stopped staring at you all evening." "I noticed," I replied, keeping my tone light, though my pulse betrayed me with its quickening beat. "Do you want me to have him removed?" he asked, his grip firming protectively at my waist. The offer was tempting. How satisfying it would be to watch him escorted out of the very celebration where my life had outshined his. But I shook my head, forcing a gentle smile. No. Let him stay. Watching is punishment enough. And it was true. Every laugh I shared, every compliment whispered in my ear, every photograph snapped with me at the center, each was another cut, another slice into his pride. He had thought firing me would erase me. Now I was carved into his memory forever. As the evening pressed on, I slipped away from the dance floor to steal a moment of quiet. The garden outside was strung with fairy lights, the air cooler, calmer. I breathed in, my chest finally loosening. That's when I heard the footsteps behind me. Slow, hesitant. Claire. The sound of my name stopped me cold. No one here called me that anymore. I turned, and there he was, standing in the glow of the garden lights, shoulders hunched as though the weight of what he'd lost pressed down on him. "You shouldn't be here," I said simply, my voice even. "I had to," he muttered, stepping closer. I had to say something. I tilted my head, curious. "After all these years, what could you possibly have to say to me?" He swallowed, his eyes darting away before forcing themselves back to mine. "I made a mistake." A laugh bubbled from my chest, sharp and bitter. "A mistake? You didn't trip over a wire. You didn't misplace a document. You destroyed me. You chose her, your little mistress, over everything I gave you. And now you call that a mistake? His hands twitched at his sides, as though he wanted to reach out, to touch, to plead. I didn't know what I had. You thought I was replaceable, I cut in, my words slicing through the night air. You thought you could build a future on lies and lust and that I would just disappear quietly. But I didn't. I rose higher than you ever dreamed, and now you have to watch me live the life you thought you took from me. His face twisted, the arrogance struggling against shame, desperate to claw its way back. Do you love him? I blinked, surprised by the question. My husband, the man who had lifted me when I was broken, who had handed me tools instead of chains. I thought of his steady presence, his unwavering belief that I was worth more than my past. My chest warmed despite the coldness of the conversation. Yes, I said firmly. And the difference is, he loves me too. Not for what I can give, not for what he can take. For me. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that cracked bones. He looked at me as though seeing me for the first time, but it was too late. Whatever realization flickered in his eyes was nothing more than ashes now. I stepped past him, my gown brushing against the stone path, my chin high. But before I returned to the celebration, I paused. You wanted to ruin me, I said without turning back. Instead, you created me. I left him standing in the garden, swallowed by the shadows, while I walked back into the light, where my husband's hand was waiting. The rest of the night passed in a blur of music and laughter, but I carried the weight of that encounter with me. It didn't burn anymore, it steadied me. For years I had dreamed of revenge, of seeing him crumble, of reclaiming everything he had stolen. And now that I had it, I realized something shocking. It wasn't about revenge at all. It was about freedom. Freedom from his shadow. Freedom from his cruelty. Freedom from the belief that I was less than what I truly was. He had fired me for his mistress, but I had returned as something far greater than he could ever imagine. The wife of the CEO, yes, but more importantly, a woman who no longer needed his approval, his validation, or his existence. When I looked across the room one last time, he wasn't watching me anymore. He was staring into his glass, hollow, defeated. And for the first time, I didn't care. The past was over. My future was already here, and it was mine. The music shifted into a softer rhythm, couples moving lazily across the dance floor, their laughter rising above the hum of conversation. I sat at the head table beside my husband, his hand resting lightly over mine, his touch grounding me in the present. But inside, my mind was still flickering with images of the garden, of him standing there under the fairy lights, smaller than I had ever seen him, a man haunted by the choices he could never undo. He stayed at the edges of the celebration, drifting, from group to group, forcing smiles, nursing his glass until it was nearly empty. I noticed people didn't linger around him the way they once did. His charm had dulled, his words no longer magnetic. It was strange. Once upon a time, I would have given anything for his attention, would have bent myself into knots just to earn his praise. Now I could barely remember why I ever wanted it. My husband leaned closer, speaking low so only I could hear. He's unraveling. I almost feel sorry for him. I shook my head. Don't. He chose this path. Every lie, every betrayal, every cruel dismissal. It led him exactly here. My husband studied me with quiet pride, as though he could see the years of pain I had carried and the strength it took to stand here now. You've built something far beyond him, Claire. Don't let his shadow touch you anymore. His words warmed me, but deep inside I knew there was one more piece of this puzzle that hadn't settled. I wasn't looking for closure. I already had that. But there was something intoxicating in knowing he still lingered in this room, watching me live the life he never believed I could claim. It wasn't vengeance anymore. It was justice. When the night drew on and guests began to leave, I spotted him lingering by the exit, his mistress clutching his arm, her expression pale and tired. I wondered how many times she had replayed her choices too, How often she thought about the day she had smirked at me outside that office, believing she had won. I rose from my chair and crossed the room. The crowd thinned, leaving only the quiet murmur of farewells and the sound of my heels clicking against the marble floor. Both of them looked up as I approached. His mistress spoke first, her voice brittle. "Congratulations." The word hung awkwardly in the air, brittle as glass. I studied her face, older now, but still carrying that same hollow confidence I remembered. For a fleeting second, I almost pitied her. She had tied herself to him, believing it would give her everything. Instead, it had taken her youth, her joy, her future. "Thank you," I said smoothly, offering her a small, polite smile. Then I turned my eyes on him. He couldn't meet my gaze, not fully. He stared just past me, as though the weight of my presence was too heavy to bear. "You should leave," I said softly, firmly. "This night isn't for you. It never was." Something flickered in his eyes, a mixture of shame and longing. For a brief, dangerous second, I thought he might beg, might try to claw back some fragment of what he had lost. But the words never came. Instead, he nodded once, curtly, his throat working as though he'd swallowed glass. He turned, guiding her toward the door, and I watched as the man who once fired me, who once laughed at my tears, who once believed I was powerless, slipped out of the hall like a shadow. And just like that, he was gone. The room seemed lighter without him. I exhaled, realizing I had been holding my breath, gripping the edges of the table until my knuckles whitened. My husband returned to my side, sliding his arm around me, his steady presence wrapping around the hollow space that had once been filled with rage. "You did it," he murmured. "You faced him." "I didn't just face him," I replied, my voice steady. "I ended him. Not with cruelty, not with revenge, with the life I built without him." The words surprised even me, but they felt true. The revenge I had imagined in my darkest nights wasn't what sustained me anymore. It wasn't about watching him crumble. It was about proving to myself that I had always been more than what he believed, that my worth didn't depend on his validation, his love, or his recognition. The last guests trickled out, the music fading, the hall settling into silence. My husband and I walked out together, the cool night air brushing against my skin. The city stretched before us, glittering with possibilities. I glanced at him, at the man who had seen my scars and never flinched, who had chosen me not in spite of my past, but because he saw the strength I carried through it. He squeezed my hand gently, as if reading the storm still settling inside me. "Are you ready to go home?" he asked. I nodded, a soft smile touching my lips. "Yes. Home. As..." The car pulled away. I looked back only once. The hall behind me, once filled with ghosts of betrayal, now stood empty. My past no longer chased me. I had faced it, silenced it, and walked away. And though the image of him standing alone in the garden would never leave me completely, it no longer haunted me. It reminded me of something else, that even the deepest wounds can heal, that even the sharpest betrayals can become the foundation of something stronger. He fired me for his mistress, but in the end, all he truly did was free me, and freedom was the sweetest victory of all. The car glided through the city streets, neon lights flashing across the windows like fleeting memories. I leaned my head against the cool glass, letting the quiet hum of the engine soothe me. For the first time in years, there was no gnawing ache in my chest, no endless loop of questions about why he had done it, why I had never been enough. Tonight had answered all of them, not with words, but with the truth etched in his hollow eyes. He had lost. I had won. My husband reached over, threading his fingers through mine, anchoring me to the present. "You're awfully quiet," he said softly, his tone more curious than concerned. "I'm just thinking," I murmured, my eyes following the blur of city lights. "About how far I've come, about how much of me was shaped by that one moment years ago." He studied me for a moment, his thumb brushing lightly against my hand. Do you regret it? The way things happened? The question lingered. Once, I would have screamed yes. I would have begged for a chance to rewrite history, to erase the humiliation, the betrayal, the nights of despair. But now, after everything, the answer was different. No, I said firmly, turning to meet his gaze. Because if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have met you. I wouldn't have discovered how strong I really was. He smiled, a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes. Then maybe the worst thing that ever happened to you was also the best. The words sank deep, resonating in a place inside me I hadn't touched in years. Maybe he was right. Maybe the cruelty of my past had been the forge that shaped me into someone who could stand here now, not broken, but whole. The car pulled into the driveway of our home, a sprawling estate, its lights glowing warmly against the night sky. I stepped out, the gravel crunching softly beneath my heels, and breathed in the crisp air. It wasn't the size of the house that filled me with peace. It was what it represented: stability, respect, love. All the things I had once believed were out of reach. Inside, the staff greeted us with quiet bows and we made our way upstairs. The gown felt heavier now, weighted not just with fabric but with the memories it carried. As I slipped it off, I caught my reflection in the mirror, no longer the fragile young woman clutching a box of belongings after being fired, but someone fierce, someone untouchable. I traced a finger along the glass, staring into my own eyes. You made it, I whispered to the reflection. You really made it. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay awake beside my husband, listening to his steady breathing, while my mind wandered back to the garden. His face in the shadows, the way his voice had cracked when he admitted his mistake. It should have satisfied me, but instead I felt only emptiness where hatred used to live. He wasn't my problem anymore. He wasn't even my enemy. He was just nothing, and nothing couldn't hurt me. The next morning, the newspapers were filled with photos of the wedding, my gown shimmering under chandeliers, my husband's arm around me, our smiles radiant. But what caught my attention most was the buzz beneath the headlines. The whispers about the man who had once been a rising star, now shrinking in the background, barely mentioned, his reputation slipping further into irrelevance. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring the taste. He had craved attention, power, admiration. And now, he had none. That was the punishment he would live with long after my revenge was forgotten. Later that week, I saw him again, unexpectedly, in the lobby of the company headquarters. He was waiting near the elevators, looking thinner, older, the sharpness of his features dulled by exhaustion. When his eyes landed on me, he straightened quickly, as though bracing for impact. "Claire," he started, his voice desperate, almost pleading. "Mrs. Bennet," I corrected smoothly, stepping past him toward the elevator. He moved to follow. "Please, just listen. I know I don't deserve it, but I need you to know how sorry I am." I paused, my hand hovering over the button. Slowly, I turned to face him. Sorry doesn't erase the years I spent rebuilding myself. Sorry doesn't change the nights I cried myself to sleep, the opportunities you ripped from me. And sorry certainly doesn't make me forget that you tossed me aside for someone who isn't even standing by you anymore. His face faltered at that last part, his eyes betraying the truth before his lips could. The mistress was gone. She had abandoned him the way he once abandoned me. The irony twisted between us like a knife. "I lost everything," he whispered. "And I gained everything." I replied, my voice calm, steady. "That's the difference between us. You destroyed yourself chasing what was easy. I rebuilt myself chasing what was real." The elevator doors slid open behind me, golden light spilling out. I stepped inside, holding his gaze for one final moment. "This is where our story ends," I said, "and where mine continues." The doors closed, sealing him out, sealing me in. As the elevator ascended, I felt the weight of years lift from my shoulders. Not because he had apologized, not because he had admitted his mistakes, but because I no longer needed either of those things to validate who I was. I had returned, not as the woman he had broken, but as the wife of the CEO, the mistress of my own fate, and the author of a story that no longer belonged to him. For the first time in my life, I was free. The city skyline shimmered against the velvet night, each light a reminder of how far I had come. I stood by the window of my office, our office now, with my husband's hand gently resting on my shoulder. Behind us, the reflection in the glass showed not a woman broken, not the discarded employee who once carried her belongings out in a cardboard box, but the wife of the CEO, the woman who had fought her way through betrayal, humiliation, and despair to stand at the very top. The man, who had once fired me for his mistress, had faded into the background of the world he thought he owned. I had seen it in his eyes when he stood trembling in the garden, when he whispered his apologies, when he admitted he had lost everything. Once, I might have craved that moment, might have begged for it. But when it finally arrived, I realized something far greater. True power isn't revenge, it's freedom. And freedom was mine. I had freedom to choose love, not desperation. Freedom to build, not beg. Freedom to rise without anyone's permission. The cruel decision that was meant to end me had, in truth, unleashed me. It carved me into someone stronger, someone who didn't just survive betrayal, but transformed it into a crown of victory. Standing there, I smiled softly, realizing that my story was not one of bitterness, but of rebirth. Yes, he had betrayed me. Yes, he had humiliated me. But he had also handed me the greatest gift of all, the chance to prove that no one, not even him, could dictate my worth. As my husband kissed my temple and whispered, "This is only the beginning," I knew he was right. My life was no longer defined by the scars of my past, but by the brilliance of my future. The mistress who had once smirked at me was gone. The man who had fired me was hollow, and I, once invisible, once silenced, was radiant, unshakable, and free. The world had witnessed my downfall. Now it would witness my reign. Because in the end, he fired me for his mistress. But I returned as the CEO's wife, and far more importantly, as the woman who had rewritten her destiny with her own hands. And that was the sweetest victory of all.